facing the police every single day.
到处都是监控，每天装甲车啊、一些坦克啊，在市区里面走来走去，也没有具体的法律规定，没有它的一些尺寸。
Reporting in Xinjiang, in China's far northwest, feels like traveling in a war zone.
So we're here in Urumqi, which is the capital of Xinjiang, in a market downtown. The security here is incredibly tight. There are armored cars on the street, police stations on every corner, and tons of surveillance cameras.
In the past year, police have stepped up security. The region is now under what's probably the most intense government surveillance in the world. Here, China is experimenting with futuristic spying technologies. For years, China has tried to suppress a separatist movement made up of Uyghurs, a local ethnic group. Authorities say the separatists are Islamic terrorists. We came to see what life looks like in a place where your every move can be monitored. To be in Xinjiang means being checked every day, multiple times a day. When you go to a market, when you drive a car, when you take a train, even your smartphone is checked.
Bone-chilling footage shows the horrific tyranny Google is now secretly fostering in China. Based on the history of how China treats its dissidents, Google could soon be complicit in the state-sponsored torture and murder of people for their political and religious views. By Matt Agarist, September 17, 2018. Last week, it was reported that a senior scientist at Google, Jack Poulson, did the right thing and resigned from his high-paying job over his employer's decision to support censorship in China. I am forced to resign in order to avoid contributing to, or profiting from, the erosion of protection for dissidents, he said. The senior scientist blew the whistle last month after The Intercept revealed through leaked documents that the internet behemoth planned to launch a censored version of its search engine in China that will blacklist websites and search terms about human rights, democracy, religion, and peaceful protest. After unsuccessfully pleading with his bosses to stop the implementation of the censorship platform Google is creating, Poulson tendered his resignation. He felt it was his ethical responsibility to resign in protest of the forfeiture of our public human rights commitments, he said. The insidious nature of supporting such tyrannical censorship speaks for itself. However, Google apparently couldn't care less about the implications and are reportedly moving forward with the initiative anyway. What the hell happened to Don't Be Evil Google? As The Intercept reports, the project, codenamed Dragonfly, has been underway since spring of last year, and accelerated following a December 2017 meeting between Google CEO Sundar Pichai and a top Chinese government official, according to internal Google documents and people familiar with the plans. Teams of programmers and engineers at Google have created a custom Android app, different versions of which have been named Maotai and Longfei. The app has already been demonstrated to the Chinese government. The finalized version could be launched in the next 6 to 9 months, pending approval from Chinese officials. The planned move represents a dramatic shift in Google's policy on China and will mark the first time in almost a decade that the internet giant has operated its search engine in the country. Through their censorship tactics, Google is helping to enable one of the most tyrannical and oppressive regimes on the planet. This has very serious implications not just for China, but for all of us, for freedom of information and internet freedom, Patrick Poon, a Hong Kong-based researcher with human rights group Amnesty International, told The Intercept. It will set a terrible precedent for many other companies who are still trying to do business in China while maintaining the principles of not succumbing to China's censorship. The biggest search engine in the world obeying the censorship in China is a victory for the Chinese government. It sends a signal that nobody will bother to challenge the censorship anymore. According to the leak, Google's Chinese search app will automatically identify and filter websites blocked by the Great Firewall. When a person carries out a search, Banned websites will be removed from the first page of results, and a disclaimer will be displayed stating that some results may have been removed due to statutory requirements. Examples cited in the documents of websites that will be subject to the censorship include those of British news broadcaster BBC and the online encyclopedia Wikipedia. What's more, Google will likely be required to turn over these blocked results to the Chinese government, in turn becoming a policing arm of the tyrannical state. It has been a requirement that companies operating in China must be prepared to police their users and turn over user data to security agencies upon request, said Ron Dybert, director of Citizen Lab, an internet research group based at the University of Toronto, according to The Intercept. We have also found overall that internet censorship in China is evolving towards less transparency, with less notification to users when messages are censored or removed across all platforms. This move by Google to not only support censorship, but participate in the oppression of more than 1 billion people should not be taken lightly. The internet giant is actively working with a corrupt and murderous government to allow that government to continue its corruption and murder unchecked and undercover. Based on the history of how China treats its dissidents, Google could soon be complicit in the murder of people for their political views. Let that sink in. While this censorship by Google may be currently reserved for China, it's only a matter of time before the tyrants in America seek to adopt it here in the name of national security, no doubt. While many Americans may be oblivious to the horrific nature of the Chinese surveillance and police state, the reality is that it exists and is getting worse. In fact, the level of tyranny has become so problematic that even mainstream media is occasionally forced to report on it. Below is a clip from a Wall Street Journal report on what they called the total surveillance state in the country. If you want a glimpse into what Google is supporting, below are more short videos exposing the horrific nature of the Chinese government, one that Ingsoc would be jealous of. Spread the love.
2011 continued to be a deadly year for adherents of Falun Gong, a traditional Chinese spiritual practice the Chinese regime has been persecuting for 12 years. More than 55 people from across China have been confirmed dead, mostly from torture.
The Chinese Communist Party's ongoing persecution of the Falun Gong spiritual practice continued to take away lives in 2011. Rights groups have documented dozens of deaths from around the country as a result of torture and mistreatment. Many Falun Gong practitioners are killed during illegal detention, often in brainwashing facilities. The perpetrators use brutal methods to force practitioners into renouncing their beliefs. One man from eastern Shandong province died less than a month after being taken to the Lingang gold mine brainwashing center. According to clearwisdom.com, a website that publishes details of the persecution, 48-year-old Zhang Guihao was severely tortured between November 11th and 30th when he died. Aside from physical torture, psychiatric abuse has also been frequently reported. In central Hubei province, 38-year-old Guo Min spent 8 years in the psychiatric institution, as she would not give in to renouncing her beliefs. She died in June after years of being given psychiatric drugs. Professor Wang Zhiyuan from the Coalition to Investigate the Persecution of Falun Gong says that the regime's persecution amounts to genocide.
From the evidence we have gathered, we can certainly show that the crimes of the Chinese Communist Party against Falun Gong includes genocide, torture, and are crimes against humanity. We will, as always, fully investigate all organizations and individuals related to this persecution, and regardless of where they are or how long it takes, bring them all to justice.
Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa, teaches the principles of truth, compassion, and tolerance. It also includes 5 meditation exercises. The practice became widely popular across China during the 1990s because of its health and other benefits. In 1999, the Chinese Communist Party, under the leadership of Jiang Zemin, started a brutal campaign to eradicate the practice. Rights group the Falun Dafa Information Center has documented more than 3,400 confirmed deaths from the persecution, with more than 55 in 2011. The center reports that hundreds of thousands remain in illegal detention at any given time.
If you're Chinese and want to complain about your government, this is where you come. If you're brave enough. The National Petitions Office is ringed by plainclothes police, and coming here isn't encouraged. Foreign journalists aren't welcome either.
Sorry?
It's all part of China's media control machine that would have you believe all is calm and stable here.
Hey, what's going on?
Don't be fooled. Below the surface, China is seething with discontent. This is a slum of the downtrodden, where victims of injustice come to live while petitioning the government. We arrived unannounced, but within seconds were being mobbed by people desperate for our attention. They showed us photographs and held up banners with stories of corruption, police brutality and sons killed in detention. Crowding in, determined their voices were heard. One of the women pleaded with us to film her, saying she'd been beaten by police. These are very rare pictures in China. This kind of discontent is seldom filmed. We couldn't stay long. They said the police were coming. But in just 4 minutes, we'd attracted a growing crowd. Before leaving, our camera was drawn to a man bearing the burn scars of a past protest. His banner read, "Human rights are more important than living." But this is what's causing the greatest anger. Homes and land being seized by the government and sold to developers to build on. These are some of the victims. They've spent all winter living in tents in temperatures well below freezing, after their own government demolished their homes to develop the land. We wanted to record their story, but police had been tipped off we were coming, and were determined to stop us filming. So we went back at night. This small tent is all Wan Baolong and his wife have left to live in. He told me how the government evicted him by force, so he set up camp where his house once stood. All he wants is enough compensation to buy a new home. It takes courage in China to talk to foreign journalists and criticize your own government like this.
There's nothing we can do. Nothing. We went to the Chinese media, but they're too scared to report it. The government won't listen. They just bully the ordinary people. They're eating our flesh and drinking our blood. They're picking our bones clean.
Wang Shuiyi is another demolition victim. This is all that's left of the home she'd lived in since childhood. She's put up her tent where her living room was. In it, she's made a shrine to her late husband. He died after they were given their eviction notice. She claims officials hounded him to his death.
They're stealing our homes. It's theft. Just theft. The poor have no human rights, no way of surviving. We've been everywhere for help.
This is the flip side to China's economic miracle. In the country's massive property boom, government officials and developers are making untold billions seizing people's land to build on. It's a land grab on an unprecedented scale, and the full force of the state is being used to crush any protest.
It looks like a medieval battle, but this is protest control in 21st century China. An army of hired thugs move in on villagers to seize their land. They're armed with guns and stun grenades but meet fierce resistance, as villagers fight back with farm tools in a pitched battle last year that claimed 6 lives. These kinds of clashes are hardly ever filmed, but they're happening more and more often. Apart from the violence, the pictures are striking because they're taken by the protesters themselves. More and more people are filming what's happening to them. Here, neighbours secretly record the moment police drag an old man from his home. Then his ill wife is hauled away, still in her sick bed. Minutes later, demolition teams move in to tear down their house for development. These poignant pictures are of a man racked with grief in the minutes after his house is demolished. He argues with police in impotent fury before claiming what's left of his home, sitting on its rubble, consoling his grandson. We can only catch glimpses, but in booming China, there's an unequal struggle raging between the poor and the powerful that the government would prefer the world didn't see. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Beijing.
On their hands and knees in one final stand to save their land. This is a protest and one of the more common ones in China these days. Farmers' lands seized by the government with little ceremony and no compensation.
We have nothing without farming. We will die. I have no profession.
Villagers show us the metal rods hired hooligans used against them. They were indiscriminate in their attacks against the young and old.
Many men came to beat us, at least 30, and they had big metal rods.
Party workers and village officials witnessed the men beating us. The police were there and did nothing.
These protests over land grabs are not new. We've been covering these things for years, but it doesn't seem to be getting any better despite government efforts to fight corruption.
The appearance of Yu Fanjun, the village chief described by locals as the villain, caused a stir. He tells us we have the story turned upside down. In fact, it had been the villagers who got violent, he says. You can hear the jeers of disbelief from the crowd. He then says, they bribed you to make this report, right? You are full of crap, he adds. At the local hospital, it was a far more serious story. As one villager shows us the injuries her brother sustained from the beatings.
During this entire land dispute, we have followed the laws. Everything we have done is legal. Of course, what has happened is unfortunate.
Officials tell us farmers will be compensated for their land, but villagers deny receiving any money. The land has already been sold to developers and the contracts signed. These farmers will never get their land back. Yet, they fight on. Melissa Chan, Al Jazeera, Yingdianjie, Zhejiang Province, China.
到处都是监控，每天装甲车啊，一些坦克啊，在市区里面走来走去，也没有具体的法律规定，没有它的一些尺寸。
Reporting in Xinjiang, in China's far northwest, feels like traveling in a war zone.
So we're here in Urumqi, which is the capital of Xinjiang, in a market downtown. The security here is incredibly tight. There are armored cars on the street, police stations on every corner, and tons of surveillance cameras.
In the past year, police have stepped up security. The region is now under what's probably the most intense government surveillance in the world. Here, China is experimenting with futuristic spying technologies. For years, China has tried to suppress a separatist movement made up of Uyghurs, a local ethnic group. Authorities say the separatists are Islamic terrorists. We came to see what life looks like in a place where your every move can be monitored. To be in Xinjiang means being checked every day, multiple times a day. When you go to a market, when you drive a car, when you take a train, even your smartphone is checked. As reporters, we were stopped dozens of times by police in just a few days. Our interviews were interrupted. We were detained and chased out of town. Daily life can be exhausting even for people who approve of the security, like this wine shop owner we met.
非常麻烦，就会给人造成一种困扰。人一旦有了困扰，他就不愿意去干这个事。对，就像我喜欢逛街，但是我一去逛街就要查个身份证的话，有造成的困扰，我就不愿意上街了。
The surveillance apparatus falls hardest on Uyghurs. Parhat Imin sells pomegranate juice in the streets of Urumqi. He used to sell Islamic items, but after ethnic riots in 2009, the police forced him to close his shop. Imin has had run-ins with authorities since. He was once sent to jail for buying hashish. Now, he says every time he goes through a checkpoint, his ID sets off an alarm. Imin says authorities are targeting him because he's Uyghur. The government didn't respond to requests for comment. Chinese rulers have been trying to control Xinjiang for roughly 2,000 years. The region is well positioned for controlling trade routes between Europe and Asia. It's also rich in oil, coal, and natural gas. In 1949, Mao Zedong sent his army into Xinjiang and incorporated it into the People's Republic of China. Many Uyghurs saw this as an act of colonization. Over time, riots erupted. In recent years, violent attacks by separatists have occurred inside and outside Xinjiang. To bring order, in 2016, Beijing installed a new strongman in Urumqi, Chen Quanguo, who was known for locking down Tibet, another rebellious region. In Xinjiang, Chen has taken his methods of mass control to a new level, turning the region into a laboratory for new surveillance technology. ID cards loaded with personal details are used to track people's movements. Residents have different levels of freedom based on factors like ethnicity and religious practices. Goods that are deemed dangerous are tightly controlled. If you want to buy a knife in this cutlery shop, for example, the purchase is tied to your ID, as this salesman demonstrates.
这个叫二维码，这个叫二维码编号，然后直接雕刻能激光刻上就可以了。就是一个身份证画面上面，然后一读卡，这个叫身份证照片、身份证号码，然后民族、家庭住址都有了，然后生成一个二维码。
The system also tracks faces. An immense network of security cameras, some equipped with facial recognition, is constantly monitoring the streets. Facial recognition systems are also used to match people with their ID cards, everywhere from shopping malls to gas stations. Authorities use artificial intelligence that can alert them if someone in a video is walking too fast or parked in the wrong spot. The government has also massively increased human surveillance. It has recruited 6 times more policemen this year than it did in 2015. Cities are now dotted with brand new police booths, one every couple hundred yards in some Uyghur neighborhoods. For Tahir Hamad and his family, all of this was too much, so they fled to the US.
任何政权没有对维吾尔族人这么严酷、这么严厉的打击。
Hamad is a poet and a filmmaker. He arrived in August and has applied for political asylum. To get out, Hamad bribed a doctor to make up a story. His daughter had to be treated for epilepsy in the US.
我一直担心，可能有新疆的警察会拦截我。
Hamad says the situation in Xinjiang took a turn for the worse in the spring this year. Police started collecting massive amounts of detail about the lives of Uyghur residents.
这个表格呢，就是发到每一个人的手里。这边有很多信息，他的民族身份、维吾尔族、无业人员、有护照、每日礼拜，这是给人打分，判断这个人是放行人员还是一般人员还是不放行人员。
Hamad and other Uyghurs in exile say people categorized as unsafe were sent to study centers for political education. We found one of the so-called schools buried down a rural road on the outskirts of Kashgar. It was newly built and looked more like a prison, with watchtowers and walls topped with razor wire.
这是说白了，这是集中营。这个时候就通过监控来指定抓什么样的人。
The government didn't respond to our request for comment, but Hamad says many more people are being detained today than in the past.
很多人他不知道为什么被抓，不知道把他送到哪里， 不知道什么时候放出来。
In Xinjiang, China's experiment with surveillance isn't just about fighting terrorism. It's also about Xi Jinping's ambitions. One of the Chinese president's signature initiatives is to develop trade routes across Eurasia, and Xinjiang is considered key to its success.
President Xi, I want to thank you.
On top of that, Western leaders are reluctant these days to publicly challenge Xi Jinping on human rights. That means one thing. The surveillance state in Xinjiang is likely to keep expanding.
也就是梦见新疆，梦见乌鲁木齐。第二天醒来呢，一看，第二天醒来以后，我们觉得是在美国很安全。
Police use who may want to retaliate against him physically.
Hey Charlotte County, this is Charlotte County COPWATCH, and I just wanted you to know that I am using this stuff under fair use, and also remember to like and subscribe this channel. Also too, keep in mind I do not make any money on YouTube. This is 5 hours work a day, you know, fighting for freedom. And you can donate with PayPal and Patreon. I just want you to think about this. If everybody gives to PayPal and Patreon, Patreon is every month. Actually, PayPal you can do every month. I have 12,000 subscribers. If everybody gives, I can quit my regular job and go full-time investigations on Charlotte County and possibly even more and beyond. So just keep that in mind. If everybody helps out, I can go full-time doing this. Thanks.